Welcome, and welcome again to another edition of the Fireside Chat here at Bethlehem Baptist Church. My name is Reverend Sean Tripline, and I am so grateful that you have decided to be with us for yet another edition, but a special edition of our conversation that we have every Thursday at noon. Now, today is a wonderful day because we have an opportunity to be in this space with Dr. Jim Crisfield, who is the superintendent of the Wissahickon School District, which is just a stone's throw away from Bethlehem Baptist Church here in Springhouse. So it is a good day, and we look forward to engaging him in conversation as we discuss the issues that are pressing for our youth, for education, especially in light of all the things that are happening in the world today. So before we jump into this conversation and invite Dr. Crisfield to be a part of this conversation, I want Pastor Quan to have every opportunity to open us up with prayer and however he sees fit.
Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you for this day. This is a day that you have made, and we're able to rejoice and be glad in it. We thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation with Dr. Crisfield. We thank you, God, for his heart and for his mind that lends itself to make the world a better place, not only for our youth, but for all of us. Bless us now with a fruitful conversation, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Dr. Crisfield, first of all, let me thank you for all you continue to do for the lives of our boys and girls, not just at Wissahickon, but in our community. So can you begin by telling us what the status is of how our young people are doing virtually at the Wissahickon School District?
Certainly. Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you very much for those kind words. I'm going to have a hard time living up to all of them, but it's a mission. I can try to do that. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I always enjoy talking with and interacting with important members and groups in the community, because one of the things we believe strongly in the Wissahickon schools is this is a community effort. That the old adage about taking a village applies all the time, and now in COVID-19 times, it applies more than ever. To your question about this, our students, all 4,800 or so of them, are living in the same world as all of us adults are, which is a world of COVID, dislocation, anxiety, fear, frankly, frustration. And while we all experience that in our daily lives, students do as well. And it is absolutely having an impact on the teaching and learning that goes on here. I'm very proud of our district, and very proud of our teaching staff and our students and our families, because we really do come together to create kind of what I find to be a very special district, one that I think is unparalleled in many ways. But we haven't found a way to shelter our students from this very evil virus and all of the things that are going around in the world around them. Frankly, not even just the virus. So we're making it work. Some of our students are in person by choice. Some are remaining virtual, again, by choice. Sometimes we make decisions that people don't agree with. I think that might have happened once or twice the last few months. And oftentimes we get letters of appreciation from parents who understand just how hard this is especially for teachers. I mean, I was a teacher many moons ago, and I can only imagine how hard it is, how difficult it is to be an effective teacher in a virtual world. I mean, one of the key ingredients to being an awesome teacher is having an authentic relationship with your students, one that they trust you, they enjoy being in your company, and vice versa. And while that was one thing to create in a classroom, in my case, of about 25 high school kids, 5 times a day, it's quite another thing to do over Zoom or Microsoft Teams or what have you. And it goes both ways. I mean, people are tired. Students, teachers, parents for that matter, are tired. It's draining. everybody sees that light at the end of the tunnel, which is keeping us going, and we're going to get there. We have optimism, and we're going to get through this thing. But meanwhile, it's rough sledding.
I believe with all my heart that those of us who serve in public arena will find ourselves when everybody will not agree with us. And that's one of the things I appreciate about you, that you make decisions on what you feel to be right, not based upon popularity. Let me also say that probably for the first time you're meeting Reverend Sean Tripline. He has served this church as youth pastor, but will be the first assistant pastor in the 133rd year of our church. And one of the things he did was, prior to this coronavirus, is that he had an after-school program, homework club, that also had students from Wissahickon. So I know he has a heart for youth. So Reverend Tripline, what question would you pose to our superintendent this day?
Yes, I would love to open up just a comment that Superintendent just made about the relationship building as a key ingredient for effective teaching, in any climate, in any culture, in any place. I would certainly agree with that statement. And from the experience of being a helping hand for our homework club and having built some relationships with students that have come in from the local elementary school as well as the middle school here in Wissahickon School District, I'm wondering, what are some of the ways that teachers are finding opportunities to deepen that sense of relationship via Zoom? Is that possible? And I think that would be helpful for all of us, as not just the students, but across the board with our ministries here at the church and other, areas of our connectivity, our attempt to connect one to another, that is strained because of this virtual space. So I'm curious, is there anything that we can say that is working or is not working, or are there some opportunities with the technology that perhaps is being developed and so forth?
You're right. So those are really good points. And I think one of the ways we're fortunate here in Wissahickon is that we have the resources to make sure that just about every family, if not indeed every family, is actually connected. If you come from a low-income household and you maybe aren't able to arrange for internet connectivity or something, we know about each of our students in those households, and we actually provide the connection for them, like a little hotspot. I can only imagine what it's like in a district that doesn't have the resources that we do. And we don't have to go too far. Norristown comes to mind. Of course, the city of Philadelphia is an extreme example, but that doesn't make our job any easier necessarily. It just makes it, shall we say, as important anyway, that of the students we know are either disengaged or having a hard time, we need to redouble our efforts to connect with them. So we have one of the things that we've noticed, and now I'm speaking more about the older students. Let's say in our case, we've noticed like grades 8 to 12. We've noticed that the thing that's being labeled nationwide as the COVID slide, it's a thing where students of all ages are sliding backwards, or at least not moving forward as fast. And we have that here. It would be disingenuous of me to suggest we figured out how to stop it. We haven't. But we have some things in place that I'm pretty excited about that I feel will have an impact. So while we have a larger number of students in those grades, again, 8 to 12, I don't know what happens in 7th grade. I guess they're still semi-dialed in. 6th grade, just getting to the middle school. They don't know what ends up yet, so it's okay. But our older students have received more grades of F this first marking period than normal. And that's even after double, triple checking, giving multiple opportunities for second chance learning. I mean, it's not for a lack of effort on the part of the adults in their lives. They're just tired and done. Also, we found that some students are disengaged. If they're not coming to school every day, if they're part of that group that's either choosing to be virtual or it has to be for whatever reason, there's a meaningful number of students who are disengaged. So we've put together a team. I've called it like the Marshall Plan for the COVID slide, if you will, an allusion to post-World War II aid to Europe. We've got to do something and treat it as an emergency. We have designated a full-time employee, one of our very best teachers at the high school, to be dedicated just to this all day. Scholastic coach. His name is Whit Yost. Students who have Whit as a teacher, English teacher, are all positive about his ability to relate to students. We have given Whit two other people to go out into the community, or more precisely, to actually go to some of these houses where the students live and just knock on the door. Every now and then it's a house that actually maybe it doesn't have English as a first language. Well, one of the people we hired speaks Spanish, and we did that intentionally. Every now and then it'll be a house where the kids, when they were younger, might have been involved in Ambler. We have an awesome, in addition to your homework club, we've got one operating in Mr. Lenny's homework club at the Old Medicine School. We've hired a guy from that program who the kids know, and he's got it. His name is Dean, and Dean will work with Whit to, student by student, figure out what's going on and figure out if there's anything we can do. We don't have the capacity to do that in an average school year, but this is anything but average. So we're doing that. We're taking that extra step, and I hope I am confident it will help stem the slide. We can't fix it. We can't fix COVID, but we can certainly take the edge off as much as we can.
Along that same line, have you noticed a population in diverse communities where that sliding is much more prevalent?
Yes, unfortunately, much the same as we have observed with our achievement gap work. And I know you've been very gracious in helping us explore that and unpack that. We do see a correlation between those students who are disengaged or sliding and either the racial identity or their status as having come from a low-income household. We aren't sophisticated enough to do some sort of causal analysis, but it's a correlation, and it's troubling. It's the same feeling I get when I think about the achievement gap, and I think about why is it that students from certain groups don't achieve as often as students from other groups, and that bothers me. I'm trying to figure that answer out, and we have the same phenomenon here. Is that there's more likely the slide is more likely to be students of color or students who come from low-income households, and that really bothers me.
So what about the staff? Is your staff diverse in terms of your teachers?
That's something that we are working as hard as we can on. The answer is not nearly as diverse as we would like it to be. We have I don't know what the percentage is in terms of our certificated staff, that being like teachers, guidance counselors, that sort of thing. But we make it our business every year to go try to find the very best candidates we can to recruit and come to Wissahickon. And it's important to us to find candidates of color. The brutal fact is they're just actually not out there. The numbers that come from the teacher preparation programs in Pennsylvania will bear that out, is that we're just not generating teachers of color. Either we're not generating them as new teachers, or we're not retaining them once they teach for a few years and for whatever reason leave the profession.
Do the teachers have to live in Montgomery County?
No, that's not a requirement. And many of our teachers do live pretty far away. And we travel, one of our very best sources for teachers is Penn State. We travel to Philadelphia for some recruitment fairs. It's probably the most effective is word of mouth. When somebody tells us, hey, there's a great teacher over here, might be looking to make a change. And privately, off the record, I'm not hesitant to go poach teachers from other places if they're great and they could really help us here. So, I mean, it's not for lack of trying, believe me.
One of the things that I am totally aware of it, no one can do it by themselves. So what can the faith community do to help in these areas?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good question because in the area of the COVID slide, and maybe even just in a normal year, academics in general, what Reverend Tripline is involved with in terms of the not counseling, but tutoring and just sort of academic support. I would say that just what our approach is to make things available and as publicized as possible. And a student might like to go to his or her church for that. They might like to go see Mr. Lenny, who they've known for years over in Ambler. I'm personally involved with the Boys and Girls Club, which I know you're familiar with, over in Ambler. And we hand select students to go to that. Unfortunately, that's closed at the moment, but same thing there. Sometimes maybe they prefer that. Maybe it's closer to their house or what have you. I think the more opportunities we offer and then publicize for students so that they can choose something, the better. So if a student is involved with your church and or even if they're not, but they would, just like the idea of that kind of after school support group, I think that's awesome. And I think the evidence bears out that relationship building can actually go well beyond academics and into their professional life too.
I want to throw out an idea. I'm not sure how much weight it has, but when we talk about minority teachers, Reverend Tripline teaches music at Swarthmore College. And I was wondering at some point, is it possibility to have maybe a guest teacher come in so that students could see somebody of color, particularly a male, and again, in keeping with the criteria, obviously, that you have set. But is that something that could happen, maybe a volunteer Teachers Day or something of that nature, so they would see somebody of color? Is that
absolutely? First of all, I wasn't focusing for a second there because as soon as you told me Reverend Tripline teaches music, I'm trying to figure out a way to poach him from wherever he is, or from he can come work for you a little bit part-time, but I think he's going to be our full-time music teacher somewhere. We'll figure it out. I don't know if it's instrumental or vocal, but we'll take either one.
Well, we can definitely do something on an ad hoc basis.
Okay, good. Fair enough.
So let me go in another direction. Obviously, Reverend Tripline could speak about that as well. As an African American, and I know that none of us are immune to this racial unrest, how is the school dealing with our students in terms of tolerance, or I may not use the word tolerance, but inclusion and diversity, and they're not engaged in this kind of race baiting things that we see, anti-Semitism, everything else? What kind of areas are you speaking to the youth about respecting people of all walks of life?
Yeah, well, obviously, what an important topic, especially these days. We have embarked on frankly, after the events of last spring, I'm not talking about COVID now, I'm talking about the racial injustices that were brought to light. The events in our community at which students spoke of their experiences in our schools and opened our eyes to things that we weren't aware was happening, which is a fault on our part. That's not an excuse. I'm admitting fault that I didn't, and that our team here didn't perceive the racism that our students had to endure. And I'm not even talking about recently, I'm talking about over the years in schools. It's no different than what happens in society. We aren't immune from these things. And as a result of that, we've embarked on what I'm going to describe as a multi-year, very dedicated and sustained effort to unpack people's prejudices, unpack the racism that exists here. I don't feel like we have, I hope we don't have anybody who's intentionally racist, but I do know we have racism in the schools. And we all have things in our own experiences that, I don't know, maybe subconsciously or at least implicitly affect how we behave and that needs to change. So we've got a three-pronged attack on that. We've got a tremendous racial equity consultant. Her name is Corey Hamilton Biagis. She has a business of her own called Just Educators outside of DC. And she's helping us develop a plan and then actually delivering a lot of the training that unpacks staff members' baggage, if you will. It helps staff members see what their mindset is now and help them get them to a different place. And we're all jumping on this journey at different places. So some staff members are very far down this journey and have already done a lot of work in this regard. And some are just beginning. So we're trying to create an environment where it's not judgmental. Wherever you are is okay, as long as you realize you got to get on and start moving forward. With Corey's help, we're unpacking things so that the conversations in classrooms with students and the interactions with students, and frankly, interactions between adults in the faculty room, wherever, can improve. Because we are willing to, we need to admit, and we are admitting, that they need to improve. The second prong we are aware of is, as students learn things and interact with materials, curriculum, we need to make sure that our curriculum is inclusive of all groups. And it's pretty good now, but it needs to be better. And we know that. So we're going to do that subject by subject, and not just in language arts and history. I'm a former history teacher, so I'm a little biased. But frankly, the curriculum needs to be inclusive everywhere, all subjects. And then the third prong is this area that you noted on earlier, which is staff diversity. And we need to get better at. My goal is to have the staff reflect the student body in terms of the composition and sort of backgrounds, and so that there are role models for everybody and everybody can envision themselves doing the awesome work of a teacher. If we get to that point, then I think we will have made a giant stride forward.
Reverend Tripline, do you have a question around this whole conversation here?
Yeah, this is a really, really good conversation. And, some of the things that come to mind have, been addressed, when we talk about staff diversity. It is so important that just as we talked about curriculum, that students from different backgrounds can see themselves in the leadership of the school, as well as in the materials that are presented for them for their learning. I guess, we can talk more about those things and kind of add more layers to that as well. But I know with the hour that we can't dig into each one and do them all justice. But one other question that I have, as it pertains to minority students in particular, beyond, staff diversity and beyond, and I really appreciate you're saying that we need to see more diversity in every facet of the curriculum, and not just, of course, you need to read Maya Angelou in your language arts class. You need to read some James Baldwin. You need, in history, obviously, you need to see things from not just one vantage point, and kind of look into the different layers of narrative and look into the different layers of storytelling and history as well. But what about just pedagogy in of itself? Is that evolving or changing given the virtual space? Do teachers have this sort of freedom to explore different ways? So we talked about the COVID slide, we talked about the Fs, and I'm wondering, and my background, I teach music, but I'm not a professional in this sense. But I'm curious about what are the methods of evaluation in this time? What are the methods of pedagogy in this time, and have they evolved for the times? And is there any open-ended learning for students as they are struggling to, try to replicate the classroom environment, which in what is obviously not a true classroom environment?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think there's two ways of looking at it. When this first hit last spring, we made it a point to de-emphasize assessments and emphasize social emotional things. Check-ins. How are you doing? This is scary. This is new. It looks like school is going to be closed for the rest of the school year, if we only knew. Are you okay? That kind of thing. And I thought that was perfectly appropriate response given the circumstances back in March, April, and May. Then we started hearing from quarters, and we had the same concerns that, well, okay, but if fall's opening up in some sort of virtual capacity, we really can't let the academics slide that much further, or I should say, we have to get back to the high standards of excellence that Wissahickon has. And so we opened this school year, this fall, returning explicitly to focusing on academic excellence. And that very quickly became clear to us that while, in a classroom that the assessment measures you speak of or kind of the pedagogy is one thing, it needs to be adapted for the virtual world. And teachers really had a hard time adjusting their lesson plans to virtual. I can only imagine how hard it is. I'm really, like we all are, I'm kind of zoomed out by the end of the day. I can only imagine what it'd be like to think about what to do with a lesson that's normally 45 minutes or 60 minutes. What you have a plan for a classroom activity where you can't exactly gather in small groups of 4 and talk it out and then report back, jigsaw stuff, all these other tricks we know. But actually you can. It takes a little work, but in Microsoft Teams, you can actually break out into small rooms and come back. But the learning curve for that, both for the learner and the teacher, is incredible.
Yeah.
So one of so while we were learning, all of us, we re-emphasized something that's come really of age the last couple of years of the high school under Dr. Blair's leadership, and that is a focus on second chance learning. So, in the old school, back in the day, if you take a test on something and you don't demonstrate that you have that material mastered, that you know what you're talking about, you got a grade and that was it, we move on. Our new way of approaching things, which is much better, frankly, is our goal is not to give you a letter grade about how much you knew at that one instant of time. Our goal is actually to get you to learn the material and acquire that skill. So if you take the assessment and show that you know very little, but then you also show the motivation to come for some extra help and review things and maybe take the assessment again, and this time you get a B+. Well, that's actually that's a really inspiring success story right there. Even though you got an F or D or whatever, now you got a B+. Now, okay, the F or D doesn't go away. We're not going to give someone a chance to take a test as many times as they need to until they get an A. But you get credit, and your learning at the B+ level is reflected in the overall assessment and grade. And I think that's tremendous. It sends a tremendous message to students too. Like, this is about learning. This isn't about memorizing. And I think that's one of we had started this before COVID, but frankly, the online environment that you speak of makes that second chance learning all the more imperative. And our teachers do it and are good at it.
I want to raise another question, and it's probably a 2 or 3-fold question. One is, I've been privileged to be in this community for almost 35 years. And when I came to Bethlehem, when we were located in Penn Lynn, people spoke glowingly about the Wissahickon School District. Many of those individuals had gone to that school, gone off to college, been there on several occasions when some of those persons were inducted into the Hall of Fame. So one question out of the number of questions I asked, number one, how is the school responding to Black Lives Matter? The second is, what is the population of students who graduate from Wissahickon, going to college, And then how many of those are minority students? And have you seen an increase or decrease? Because again, I come back and say that there were some persons here when I moved here and spoke glowingly about Wissahickon, and many of those African Americans going on to college. So has that number increased or decreased? And I would assume that the population of minority students had grown over the years based upon just the county itself. So those are the number of questions I want to pose.
So you did warn me before you said into that you were a multi-layered question. That was multi-layered. Let's go one at a time. And as I forget them along the way, please remind me.
Okay.
The first, I think very importantly, is how are the schools treating and having conversations about the Black Lives Matter movement? And that's actually come up as recently as last week when we saw all the terrifying pictures from District of Columbia and the contrast of official law enforcement response to that versus other protests with people who look different getting treated differently by law enforcement. So that was an immediate, or I should say, that was the most recent example of how conversations need to pop up in classrooms, because students, not just students of color, but particularly students of color, want to talk about that, as they should. And what we're finding is our teaching staff is in different places with regard to their comfort level to have that conversation. And that's part of this training we're doing with Corey Hamilton Biagis with regard to exploring cultural responsiveness and racial equity. Because before the adult in the room is comfortable talking about things, the conversation is going to go nowhere. And in fact, it could go to a dangerous place. And what I have found is that almost just as bad is to ignore it and suggest that there's nothing to talk about. There is something to talk about. But I do understand, now I was a history teacher, so perhaps it would be natural for me to talk about these things with my students. I taught 11th grade history, and yeah, I would put aside the curriculum for a whole day if something like this happened. But you need to have that conversation in a way that's safe for everybody and comfortable for everybody. That environment is not the place to disrupt the racism that we have going on. We need to do that for sure, but not with a bunch of vulnerable students right after a really disturbing set of images on TV. They need to, that's more about sharing feelings and exploring how one takes in all this information. And teachers are in different places with their comfort level in that. I don't know how else to say it. Some have criticized me and us for not providing like some sort of script or something. I think a script is like the worst thing. That's like a statement. Why don't you just read it and then like a morning announcement and be done? That's not what we're talking about here. That's particularly older students are gonna fall for that, nor should they. On the other hand, though, until such time as we unpack all these all the things that impacts an adult's mindset, what I've noticed when I was a teacher, students can sniff out in a heartbeat when you haven't prepared for a lesson or when you're uncomfortable talking about something. Now, perhaps a 7-year-old can't, but I'm here to tell you a 17-year-old can, because it happened to me many times. So we expect our professional staff, and we know that they can because they're really good, to have these conversations, but they need to know how to do it in a way that makes it safe and it makes it non-threatening.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question as you go through that multi-choice question? One of the dangers, of course, in these conversations that are so important to have is, I think, kind of expressed in what you're saying, that some teachers have that concern of, can you give me something to say? In our society, there's how do I put it, an epistemological issue. There's an issue about what is truth and, what is fact. We've heard, the for a number of years, terms like alternative facts and alternative realities and so forth being thrown around, because sometimes people, depending on their cultural position, depending on who they're listening to, depending on what their ideology is as it relates to politics or some other thing, come with very different perspectives and very different conclusions from very different starting points. So my question, I think, for you as it relates to the very specific issues of racism and social inequity and social injustice and so forth, where those have come up and will continue to come up, is there not a statement to be read or a script or anything of that sort? Are there any base starting points for, or factual information for teachers to engage students as it relates to real data, when it comes to issues in policing in some environments? We're very fortunate here at Bethlehem to have a wonderful relationship with the Lower Gwinnett Police Department. Chief Kenny, Lieutenant Gargan have come, others have come to talk about this issue, and some would be surprised about their willingness to say that, yeah, there's a problem. But not everyone is at that place. So can you speak to just where teachers are in terms of consuming real data that suggests inequities in society? And that in itself probably might speak to some of the issues that some have about just having the courage to talk about what's happening in the world.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I was reading something the other day that described our current place where we are in the country as the post-truth era.
Yeah.
And that's such an interesting concept to me. And I object to it, yet at the same time almost accept it, because I've been saying this for perhaps the last 4 years, politics aside, that the truth matters, like facts matter. And one of my high school buddies who I keep in touch with asked me just a couple of days ago, he knows I'm in the profession, and he's like, well, do we teach our students how to discern truth from non-truth? He used different language, which I will not use in this venue. And I thought about that a little bit. And actually, our students are pretty darn good at understanding the dangers of social media and how non-truths get promulgated to the point where they become almost like facts, although it's nonsense. Now, that's not to say that our students don't make mistakes in social media. They most certainly do. And we try as hard as we can to point out that, hey, the social aspects of social media, the bullying, all the bad things are out there. But they kind of get it that when they read something, they kind of get it that it's an opinion. So I was thinking about that when you were asking a question. I was thinking about the events the other day, like in DC. What would the facts be there? Well, the facts would be that a group of people stormed the Capitol building. That's one fact. Another fact is if you looked at that group of people, there were very few, if any, people of color, probably zero. Okay, that's another fact. Now we're still in fact mode. Like I don't feel like anyone can dispute these things. Another fact: there were police officers on the scene. That's factual. It's also factual that some of the people storming the Capitol physically abused the police officers. Now we're still in fact mode. And if we just stop right there and we contrast that with facts from another protest some other time, and we use those same variables, what was the racial composition of the people protesting? How did the police interaction go? Now you have two facts. Now this is back to my history teaching days, but now you have two sets of facts you can actually compare, and they're factual. You're not using some TV station or some social media outlet to tell us what the facts are. We're coming up with the facts ourselves. That's kind of where we are now.
Right. And
if the students can take some time to do that, first of all, they get empowered, because then they actually own the facts, because they determine for themselves what's factual, what's not. Then they can have the conversation, because you can't argue about the facts because you just finished deciding what they were yourself.
Yes.
So I want to move on to truth. So when we talk about the number of students at Wissahickon who go on to college, and how does that compare to minority students?
I would say the variable to look at that we haven't really grasped yet is instead of going on to college, successfully completing college. Because I can tell you right now, we're very, very good at graduating our students. I mean, we don't even think about that topic because almost all of our students graduate. That's not an issue here. And that is an issue in other school districts. They have different circumstances. We graduate all of our students, and a very large percentage of all of our students go on to college, as it says. So if we just stopped right there, we could pat ourselves on the back and be done. But I think one of the disturbing things that we're seeing is how many students drop out and don't finish college. It could either be a 2-year or a 4-year. I mean, I think what the criteria that's emerging in the profession and across the nation is finish in 5 years. So we're giving kids a little bit of a break. It's not like a typical 4-year degree, but the criteria is, hey, did you finish a higher ed degree in 5 years? And I don't think we're very good at that. And I know that very few high schools across the country are good at that. And this is the part of the problem, that kids will emerge from 2 years of college or 1 year with a ton of debt and nothing to show for it. I haven't parsed the data to see if it's particularly acute with students of color or students who come from low-income households, the two groups we look at with our achievement gap. It wouldn't surprise me if it was, but I'm not sure that the same things are at work there. And I do know this is a nationwide problem. And I do know that high schools like Wissahickon, districts like Wissahickon, need to stop patting themselves on the back until such time as they can demonstrate that their kids actually have the ability to then show a college degree. Then I'm very happy.
So in comparison to years, and what is the actual population of the school? You mentioned earlier when you came on, but how many minority students are in that? I think it was 4,000 something.
I was just doing that just today, actually this morning, doing the count from December because I have to create this achievement gap 10-year attack plan annual report, which I'm going to share with the public at the end of this month. And as of this December, we had a total of 4,804 students, and 9.95% were Black. So that's about 478. That's district-wide. It's not obviously not the high school, and that's been pretty consistent percentage over the last 3-4 years.
And those minority students come primarily from what, Norristown, Ambler?
Well, we don't have any Norristown. We only have Ambler. But yes,
Ambler.
the answer is there's many.
Oh, Penland. Okay, Penland.
Correct, and Penland.
When I come back again to the advisory team that you have comprised together, which I think is great, do you have any minority? What is the population minority participation there?
Well, we have a couple different groups. I think the one you're referring to is the Superintendent's Advisory Council.
Yes.
So I was just doing that also, and you got the email from me. Thank you again for agreeing to help us with that. So as you recall, there's about 25 or so people on that advisory council. There's staff members, and then maybe 10 or so staff members and 15 members of the community. And I don't know how I haven't asked them to tell me, how they identify, but I do know there are people of color in that room, as you recall. And I think we get a really good mix from Ambler, Penland, in terms of older, younger, staff members of color, staff members not of color. We have a couple representatives from the faith community, yourself and Rabbi Marks. We have some parents. We have Bob Jarvis from Penn, who you know you know. We have a group called the Guide Right Program. I don't know if either of you are familiar with them. They are an awesome group that we came upon them one way or another and their concept is to provide role modeling for older students, male students of color, not necessarily just male, but that's their focus. And while there have been things like that in the past year, which they kind of withered off for whatever reason, but this group is motivated, and they are either in this group or in some other ways. They go to our high school or middle school. They meet with students of color, the CASA club there. And what I like about the advisory council is it's not just academics, it's not just teachers. I value their opinion very much, but I hear from them all the time. It's also members of the community. And that's why it kind of gets back at the village concept. We need everybody in on this.
I really appreciate your transparency as well as your involvement in the community. I know your involvement with the MWI board and other areas by which you serve in the community, and I certainly appreciate that. I want to go back again to something you said earlier in terms of students have an opportunity to either choose to attend or go virtually. What percentage of the students are actually coming into the school now out of the population?
The answer would depend on the level. At the K-5 level, we just this week offered up the chance to change your elected mode. And so this week we have about 70 to 75% of the students choosing to come in person. And then we go up to middle school, and it's perhaps roughly the same percentage, but at middle and high school, they come in every other day because we don't have enough room usually to keep the proper distancing at those grades. And at the K-5 level, we have enough room, and they're a little smaller, et cetera. So we can keep our 6 feet and have everybody in who wants to come in every day. At secondary level, we have what's blue and gold days, and they come in every other day if they want to. So that's about there. It's also about the same percentage. But the thing what happens at the older students is, so the way we're delivering the virtual opportunity is they can also stay home and dial into the class just like the other virtual students. So sometimes we'll have 2 or 3 students in a classroom on a given day and the rest of the class at home on Zoom, in our case, Microsoft Teams. And that's not ideal. I mean, it's just not the way. It's really hard to teach to screen here, 5 live students over here. I mean, almost by definition, your attention is split.
I can say this with no reservation, and many of our congregants who will be privileged to watch, and perhaps even Reverend Tripline, are meeting you for the first time. But I am grateful to God that you have demonstrated through the years of your participation here in this community, your openness, your willingness to help make a difference in the lives of our students, particularly African-American students. And I know that you've inherited some problems that just came about as a result of this community itself. I've been here enough years to know that there has been some deep-seated racism. Mm-hmm. And so some of the things that we're dealing with now are things that have been part of this community for a number of years. And the mere fact that you're seeking to make a difference. And I've seen that and know that, and I appreciate again how candid you have been. All the responsibility is not yours, even though you are the superintendent. All of us have responsibility. I've said to the church as well, we cannot be so closely related to proximity of the school and not be concerned about the well-being of all of our students, not just African Americans, but all of our students. And the population has increased in terms of diversity, whether it's Latinos, others. And I'm sure that there's another burning question that Reverend Tripline would have first time meeting you. But I say again to our congregation and to him that I'm appreciative of your commitment to make a difference, and you're making a difference. And again, we have a responsibility. No one can do it by themselves. It takes all of us. It's a community. And anything we can do here at this church or through the faith community, I certainly are grateful for my relationship with Rabbi Marks and many others who serve on the advisory council. Mm-hmm. But it's something that all of us have to make sure that we're doing our best to change the course of this country. Reverend Tripline?
Yes, a few things that really just jumped out at me from what you kind of explaining from the vantage point of the district. I definitely appreciate the fact that you have certain groups that are helping to, shore up some of these issues from just educators you mentioned, as well as guide writing. Some of those are programs I'm not familiar with. But we'll look forward to learning more about those programs. And I'm happy to hear that you have those resources put in place for students, especially students of color, that may feel that they are not having the same experience as other students are, in the district. And of course, that is not unique to Wissahickon, but it is something that is certainly an issue in Wissahickon, as it is in other places in the Commonwealth and the state. Are there opportunities for churches like Bethlehem, individuals like myself who have a burden for young people that can bring representation? Are there anything being put into place, any programs that might be on hold now, but might be returning once we get back from the virtual space, that we can be engaged in that work and partner with you in that way?
The answer is yes. And first, let me just state the obvious. First of all, thank you very much for those nice words. And the partnership we have with you, and the mutual shared understanding that this is important, that perhaps you can make the argument nothing's more important than these things we're talking about. And I want to just reiterate that we feel it's important. This matters to us. And what also matters to us is your support and knowing that you are in this with us. I can't tell you how comfortable that makes me feel, and I'm very appreciative of that. To answer your question, once this COVID dust settles, and it will settle, and we will come out the other end of this thing, I do believe there will be opportunities for many different parts of the community, including the faith-based part of the community, to join together and deal with this topic. If the topic's racism, that's a natural fit. If the topic is how to reverse the effects of the COVID slide, well, perhaps not as natural, but yeah, the tutoring program you have, for example, may be expanded. What's important for me to know is that first, I have a future music teacher in our midst, so that's awesome for me, A, and B, it's just reassuring to know that the mutual commitment is there. So I can't tell you how appreciative I am of that.
Yes, it's definitely a blessing, and our commitment to help in any way possible, I think is expressed through the Homework Club. And we only have a half year or so of that being underway with COVID, but we're still thinking through ways even now to how we can support our young people that we've built relationships with and have been somewhat distant during the pandemic. But even in this time, we're looking for ways to reach out to them as well as support them in any way that's possible. So I definitely appreciate your willingness to engage us in the conversation. We're in the middle of, NFL playoff time right now. So this is the 2-minute warning. We're approaching the end of the hour, but it's really been a great conversation. Both the support of the students, but also the support of the teachers as well. As an educator, that's something that's a burden of mine as well. Kind of talking about truth. Part of that, I guess maybe if we wanted to bundle that up into one category, might be social analysis. And that is not necessarily an easy field, and it takes some nuance, and it takes a very close eye to the facts and kind of separating fact from fiction. But we certainly want to, it's our work to, give a voice to these things. And it's an important work indeed.
I could say too that I think I agree with that 100%. And if there's any if I call a timeout and use one of my timeouts, I would say that the message is we're in this for the long haul. This is not a fleeting idea that's going to check a box and move on to some other different initiative. I promise you and the people who are going to be watching and anyone else who will listen to me that this matters to us. And we're committed to it, and we may make some mistakes along the way, but we're gonna do this in a long-term way because it really matters, and it matters to us.
And we have a long-term commitment as well. This is not something that we're just doing in a season.
Right.
We have moved to become a multicultural church that embraces inclusion and diversity, predominantly African American church, but we have pushed the envelope to be more inclusive. At the same time, I have been part of the Bluebell Rotary for a number of years, and I've watched with great delight some of the students from Wissahickon, Student of the Month, and given scholarships from that regard. We also moved to have our education scholarship ministry led by a gifted young lady to include a student from the community as well as the church. So there's students, and it's not based upon color. It's based upon the opportunity to assist a student who is seeking to grow intellectually and socially and spiritually. So again, this is a partnership. Hopefully we will continue discussion, but more than that, it'll be more than discussion, the work, the hard work, as you indicated. And none of us have all the answers. And we know as a church, we can't do it all by ourselves. So we are also looking for the school district to be the kind of support partner we need. So thank you once again. And I mean that sincerely, that we are committed to move beyond these walls and make a difference in the lives of our young people. It takes all of us to create a village, and we have a village, but we have some wonderful students, and we don't want to give up on any of them. Nope. And we know that some of our students are struggling, academically, socially, and may not have all the resources at home, but we have resources in our community, and we want to make sure they are available. So thank you again. Reverend Tripline, would you also close us out? Now, he may be looking at you as someone to come on board as a staff, but remember, you have been called to serve here at Bethlehem. So we're looking forward to your continuing commitment to God, and but you are a multi-talented individual, and I'm sure there'll be times when you can be of assistance to the school, to our youth, and our total community.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Crisfield, for your presence today. It's been an engaging conversation, one that's been insightful. And just as you have said that you feel reassured that you know that even though we're just a stone's throw away from your office here in Lower Gwinnett, Ambler, whatever the particular township is down the street, we're also very grateful, and we have a very good sense of your willingness to engage us in this way. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Yes, let us pray. Eternal God, we just say thank you for this conversation, for this day. We thank you that despite of all of the differences that we have as a community, we are still one as a community. We thank you, God, that Dr. Crisfield is here and that he has engaged us in this talk that will lead to work that will better the lives of people in this community. You have given us a burden not just for those that check off certain boxes that are like us in different demographic ways, but you have given us a burden for all people. So help us to serve one another, help us to love one another, help us to do the things that will help people to know that even in 2021, even in the midst of pandemics, of public health crises, as well as pandemics of social injustice and so forth, that we still have an opportunity to bond together as people that have served you and have loved one another because of the love that we have experienced. So help us, God, to just do this work with faithfulness. Help us to not get weary in this work, and help us to make sure that all are blessed because of our presence as a school district and as a church in this community. We thank you. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Thank you again. Take care. Talk to you soon.
You too.
Take care.